Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second half of today's episode. I broke it up in two so that you would have the option to go back to one or the other if you really liked any of our work today. So, and show them off to your friends and say,
Listen.
see, you guys should be going and listening to this show. They're amazing.
Listen to your little Christmas story one at a time.
So, all right, guys. So this episode, Tyr has a tale for you.
Yes, instead of villains, we did Hammond and Dale's Christmas Tale.
Well, everybody loves Hammond and Dale, so that's...
So, and this one is not a poem, not as creative, and probably a little less funny, but it is pretty closely based on A Christmas Carol.
Can't wait to hear it.
All right, jump in?
Yeah, jump on in.
Okay. Once upon a time, on Christmas Eve, old Hammond sat busy in his workshop. The bustle of those outside, the steam carriages and chatter, carried through with the cold as he worked restlessly on his latest invention. Hammond, are you out here? The gears on the inside of the door turned, releasing the lock, allowing Zara to stick her head inside. Her eyes flicked over the work table before her shoulders relaxed and she stepped through fully. Dale, sneaking through between her legs, dashed over to search the floor beneath Hammond's seat for any scraps that may have fallen. They said you've been holed up out here working on something. I'm home for the holiday. Are you planning on joining us this year? I know you usually get wrapped up in your work, but Meredith was hoping to get everyone together. Hammond blinked at the young woman as though rousing from a deep sleep. She was the same lass he'd worked besides for years, but different. Her appearance had changed only slightly, her dark hair now tied back in a professional knot, and she'd traded her leathers for business attire. But she also stood taller, her shoulders relaxed, her chin high. Her eyes gleamed with less bravado and more confidence in a way that only came with experience, with pride. Hammond's lips twisted with a bit of pride of his own, along with a touch of envy and nostalgia. He'd once found his own place among those she now counted as peers. But differences of opinion had ended that journey years ago. He much preferred the freedom of his own workshop and the ability to do as he pleased, like the projects he was currently working on that required his attention. Hammond stepped forward and patted Zara on the shoulder. Ah, good to see you, lass. The holiday, you say? Zara smiled softly. Yes, Meredith was hoping you could attend this time. And maybe bring a pie? Hammond's attention drifted back to his work as he waved a hand dismissively. Sure. He glanced at his mechanical calendar on his wall and nodded. A week from Tuesday, yes? Tell Mary not to worry. I'll be there. Zara sighed and moved closer, winding his calendar and shifting the gears forward. Christmas is tomorrow, Hammond. Today is Christmas Eve. Hammond stared at the calendar a moment before brushing it off. Yes, of course. He immediately went back to work, and Zara's attention shifted to the equipment laid out in front of him. Hammond, I thought you'd stopped capturing brownies. Remember what happened last time? Not to worry, lass. He tapped the new and improved container holding the shaking brownie. There's no escaping this one. That's not the point. How would you feel if someone locked you in a cage? The poor little creature was probably just trying to get home to his family for their Yule festivities. Hammond rolled his eyes. Rats with magic, he muttered. Nuisances. Little more than vermin. And if I can find a way to extract the magic from them, that's all they'll be. Zara placed a hand on his arm. Consider what you're doing here, Hammond. Look at that poor creature and consider that maybe you're not so different. Take a look at what you're doing here and decide if this is really the man you want to be. And with that, Zara left, the lock spinning shut behind her. Hammond immediately went back to work, his eyes straying to the little creature no more than once or twice before he grumbled and lost himself in the work once more. Success. That was what really mattered. There were always some casualties on the path to victory. Some risks, some losses. It was to be expected. But there were no wins, no rewards, if you didn't take the risks. That was something he'd learned a long time ago. And one day, when his invention changed the world, they would realize he was right. His methods would be ignored in favor of his success. The hours ticked on, and Hammond found himself reworking calculations he thought he'd figured out. He frowned at the equations, making adjustments to his machine. It was fine. It would take a little longer than he planned. But he would still have everything figured out before the International Exposition. He just had to work around the clock for a few more days. It would be worth it to see the looks on the faces of his former colleagues when he unveiled a machine that could pass an object through time and space. Something niggled at the back of his mind, but he dismissed it just as quickly. There was work to be done and little time to finish, no time for silly distractions when he was on the verge of a breakthrough of epic proportions. It was a concept he and his peers at MI666 had worked on years before their superiors had deemed it impossible, though Hammond and his partner Morley had not given up so easily. Continuing to work on the project in their spare time, it was Morley who initially had come up with the idea of an alternate power source, one that fused science and magic in a way that no one had dared before. But they were discovered and their project confiscated before they could put their theory to the test. And after Morley's death, Hammond moved on to more personal ventures, and the experiment had been forgotten for a while. But then Hammond had gotten word of the International Exposition and the list of attendees, and his old hunger for success burrowed under his skin once more. And if this time he worked a little more recklessly, a little more ruthlessly, well, that was the price of success. No risk, no reward. Making one final adjustment, Hammond connected the machine to the power source, ignoring the way the little creature pushed at the sides of his prison as he plugged it into the prototype. Electric currents zapped over the outside of the box as Hammond cranked the gears. Dale darted under the workbench, peering out nervously as the machine emanated a low whine that ground into a crackling hum. The brownie huddled in the corner, trying to escape the draining pull of his magic as it was sucked away to power the machine. His little body glowed, and the machine began to rumble, coming to life before Hammond's eyes. His fingers grasped a lever that would punch a small hole through time and space to deliver a pre-placed object to the future. He shoved the lever down, and the machine roared louder. The currents grew larger, arcing through the cramped space until they burst outward, hitting Hammond and throwing the workshop into darkness. He landed on his back, hitting his head hitting the floor with a crack. Spots danced in his vision before fading into darkness. Hammond woke to the clanging and clattering of his workshop, as though every machine had come alive at once. The darkness swam before his eyes with nothing more than the dim light of a lantern barely lighting the corner of his workbench. Hammond sat up slowly, and the cacophony of machines came to a stop. There was a brief moment of silence, and then the sounds of chains dragging along the rough workshop floor pulled his eyes up to search the darkness. No one's there, he said to himself, even as a glow began to form before his very eyes. Something bumped against Hammond's back, and he jumped before realizing it was Dale cowering behind him. Nothing to worry about, pig. A bump to the head messes with the senses a bit. But even as he spoke, the glow began to take shape, forming until he stared into a face he knew as well as his own. Morley? I don't believe it. It's Morley's ghost. Why are you here? What has happened to you? His old friend hovered over him, chains dangling from his limbs, clanging with cages and cranks and gears and gadgets. What has happened to me happens to us all. In death, we are condemned to wear the chains we forged by our lives, and you too will one day know the regret that comes with eternity of atonement for our days among the living. Hammond stuttered. But you were a brilliant inventor. Your success hasn't been forgotten. Success? Success at the expense of humanity and compassion is no success at all. What is our success to the magical creatures we used for our own gain? It is not success, not progress when your means rely on destruction. And I am condemned to pay my penance, but I came tonight to warn you that you may have a chance to escape my fate. Hammond's shoulders fell with relief for barely a moment before Morley rushed forward, giving Hammond and Dale a fright so startling that Hammond let out a manly squeak, and Dale hiccuped, bursting into his werewolf form. You will be visited by 3 ghosts, Morley informed him harshly. Without their help, you will only repeat my mistakes. Expect the first at the stroke of 1. Hammond scrambled to his feet to argue as the apparition of his old friend moved away. Ghosts! Morley, but before Hammond could argue, the man was gone. He blinked into the darkness of the room and rubbed a hand over the knot on his head where he'd hit it in his fall. He'd had his share of injuries in his day, but never had he hallucinated quite that vividly. Shaking his head, he found his high-backed chair in the corner and settled in. Perhaps a little rest was in order before he got back to work. His eyes had barely closed before he was blinking them open again, finding himself face to face with another vision. The face of a young man morphed before his eyes to an older one, before shifting again into someone completely different. The faces continued shifting on the ethereal being as Hammond slipped from his chair. Who are you? The voice was low, but sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. "We are the Bobs of Christmas past." The being extended a hand, and Hammond eyed it warily. "Come with us," it insisted. Before Hammond could open his mouth to refuse, Dale latched onto one arm and the ghost the other. Within seconds, he was flying through the air at a dizzying speed. The spirit came to a sudden stop, and Hammond and Dale were dropped into a heap in front of a tiny, rundown house that he hadn't thought about in years. In a flash, they stood inside, watching a young Hammond clutching at his mother's long skirt, attempting to steal some warmth from the stove, while she tried to make a holiday meal out of practically nothing. His father sat only feet away on the couch, the anger and defeat that lived in his eyes, dulled slightly by the bottle clutched in his hand. "Mama, why doesn't Papa make stuff anymore?" His mother paused and crouched down to look Hammond in the eye. "Your Papa's just had a bit of bad luck, that's all. A few of his inventions didn't work the way he wanted them to, and he's had to be a little more careful is all. Once he gets his confidence back, we'll be just fine. He's too smart to give up, just like you." But giving up was exactly what his father had done. A lurching sensation had Hammond closing his eyes, and when he opened them again, it was the exact same scene, only he was years older. Whatever had happened to make his father quit, he never got over it. He eventually found a labor job that made him miserable but paid their bills, if only barely. But the defeat and anger that lived in his father had spilled over to the rest of them. Hammond's mother had done her best, encouraging Hammond as he threw himself into his own work, using discarded parts to create something new. She took a seat next to him as he tinkered with a new gadget. "What's this?" she asked. "Pointless," he answered. "Don't have the piece I need to make it work, and we don't have the money to get it. It's a waste of time and parts," he said with frustration. She placed a hand over his before he could dismantle his work. "Your father, before he quit, was quite brilliant. But when a few of his inventions failed, he started playing it safe. He stopped taking risks, thinking that if he never took a chance, he'd never fail. And that fear grew until he was too paralyzed to take a chance on something great again." She slipped the bracelet from her wrist, her only possession that hadn't been sold when everything else when times had been hard, and she tucked it into his hand. "But you can't go through life not taking risks. No risk, no reward. Get your missing piece and create something brilliant." Hammond immediately shook his head and tried to push the bracelet back, but his mother refused. "I don't need it, Hammond. I only need to know that you won't end up miserable like he is. Be the man that you were meant to be, and don't be afraid to take a chance." His mother hadn't lived many Christmases beyond that, and her words had stuck with him for a long time. Another lurching sensation pulled him away, and this time Dale caught him, carrying him bridal style as they landed in a celebration that Hammond vaguely remembered. His eyes scanned the room, but he couldn't remember the significance of this place. "Why are we here?" "To remember," the spirit answered. Dale shrugged and took his arm, leading him in a dance. The werebore spun him through his past as they glanced around at unfamiliar faces. Dale pulled Hammond in tight to his chest before spinning him out and reeling him back in, dipping him over backward in a back-crackingly deep bend Hammond was sure he would pay for later. But as he blinked out at the upside-down world in front of him, the face of an angel appeared. "It's her," he said as Dale pulled him back upright. "Catherine, this is where we met." They watched an awkward young Hammond attempted to woo a young woman with one of his inventions. He wound a dial and set a metallic disc in her hand. The mirror slowly opened, and he remembered that it was supposed to extend an arm to powder her nose. But that wasn't what happened. She watched in amazement as the arm extended, but then slammed down, sending powder everywhere, all over both of them. Dale snorted next to him, and luckily Catherine had merely laughed and asked how she looked. He sighed, remembering those days fondly. She'd been a lovely woman. The lurching sensation returned, and this time he was back in a workshop, Catherine frowning at him from the doorway. "If I hadn't come to say goodbye, would you have even noticed I was gone?" she asked. Hammond barely looked up from his project. "I'm almost there. Success doesn't happen overnight." "There's more to life than success, Hammond. You spend so much time chasing a success that you let everything else pass right by you. I wish you well, and I hope success is enough for you, because in the end, it's all you'll have left." The world spun, and Hammond was once again back in Dale's arms, this time in his own workshop. Determined to make his escape, Hammond marched to the door with Dale at his side, pulling it open and coming face to face with two more ghosts. The four of them screamed. The ghost on the right clutched his chest. Oh, hey there, it's us, Hank and Bill. We're your ghosts of Christmas present. Present, Hammond huffed. What's there to see in the present that I haven't already seen? The ghost on the left pulled out a black box with a large dial on the face of it. We're about to find out. Hey, wait a minute, the other man complained. I was supposed to get to do that. What? No, you weren't. They said I could do it. Hey, Bill, look over there. Is that your wife? I think she just winked at me. What? Where? The dial spun and the world moved, dropping them into the forest this time. And this time Dale was dropped into Hammond's arms, and they both crashed to the ground when he couldn't support the wereboy's weight. He recognized the area they landed, which meant he wasn't surprised when a young brownie scurried past, darting into the underbrush. Hammond followed, chasing the little bugger until it disappeared into the base of a dying tree. In a flash, Hammond and Dale and the two ghosts were brownie-sized and standing in their home, much the way they had his own. The young brownie scurried over to his mother, clutching at her skirt in an attempt to warm up after being out in the rain. The older brownie pulled open her cupboard, confirming what she must have already known. There wasn't a scrap of food in it. The child reached into his pack and pulled out his treasure, a single, slightly crushed cranberry. The older brownie kissed his little head and set to work cutting the berry into pieces. They looked out to the empty chair in the sitting room with sad eyes before returning to their work. Hey, this seems kind of familiar, don't it, Hank? Sure does, Bill. The only thing that's missing is the poor lad's dad. Wonder where he could be. Any thoughts, Bill? Bill tapped his chin thoughtfully. Well, it seems like the family was expecting him, but he must have gotten caught up somewhere. Any idea where he could be, Hammond? Hammond crossed his arms over his chest and frowned at the small boy. Seeing that Hammond wasn't answering, Dale leaned over to help him out. By the way, I cannot do an Antonio Banderas voice, so you'll have to imagine it. Anyway,
Okay.
Dale leaned in to help him out. Hammond, it seems possible that the missing brownie was the one you trapped. Hammond ground his teeth, but Hank and Bill jumped in before he could respond. Ah, that's right. You caught and tortured the poor lad's father. Well, nothing more to see here. You've ruined this celebration. Let's see what's next. He once again pulled the dial out, and the men began fighting over it. Hammond was about to pluck it from their hands when they were swept away once again. This time landing in Meredith's dining room, on Dale's back like he was riding a horse. With a sigh, he stood and made his way over to the dining room table, admiring Mary's hard work. Robert rubbed a comforting hand over her shoulder as she frowned at the empty seat. Don't take it personally, my love. You know how he gets when he's wrapped up in a project. He promised he'd be here. He said he'd bring pie. Now he won't even answer his door. Let's just eat and enjoy the meal as a family. Maybe he'll join us later. Mary rolled her eyes, but sat and smiled politely as Philip and Wilhelm told her about Karen's latest trip with Tedrick. Hey, Hank, notice anything missing? You know, Bill, now that you mention it, it does seem like something's missing. Hammond grunted. All right, I get it. I couldn't even be bothered to show up at Christmas, and I'm no different than my father. Right. Well, that too. But I was referring to your friend that you have trapped in your shop of horrors with you. If you're not answering the door, it means he's missing out on his family dinner too. Dale gasped in horror and looked around the room, confirming their words. He took the empty seat next to Zara, attempting to get her attention, but she carried on her conversation with Poppy as if he didn't exist. Zara, my heart, you must notice that I'm not here with you. I promise I will never take another moment with you for granted, my love. I gave you time to see the world so that when you came back to me, we could be together. You must remember me. Seeing that his words were having no effect, he turned a less than friendly look on Hammond. I cannot be with my love if I am trapped in there with you, he said, thrusting a finger in the direction of the workshop. Bill and Hank both scrambled for the dial once more, fighting over the device until the round dial popped off and flew across the room. Both men paused, their hands jerking away from what was left of the device, but before it could hit the ground, the world disappeared, pulling the four of them down with it. Hammond and Dale fell for much longer this time, finally landing on a road at the feet of a large cloaked figure. Tentacles poured out from the bottom of her dark robes, undulating as the creature hovered closer. Hammond and Dale scrambled to their feet, looking up at the creature with fear. I am Linda, the ghost of Christmas future. And what am I meant to see in the future? Hammond asked warily, looking around until he spotted the glow from a nearby window. Moving closer, Hammond attempted to peer inside, but the window was too high. Dale scooped the man up, holding him higher until they could both peer over the windowsill. Inside, Wilhelm and Philip set a table, chattering happily with Zara, Robert, and Mary. Karen and Poppy moved into the room, setting desserts on the table before joining their friends. Dale held his breath until a wolf pup and bear pup came tearing through the room, with Dale in his small pig form on their heels. Philip and Zara set plates filled with pie and cookies on the lower table for the three of them, and Dale's shoulders sagged with relief, but Hammond felt none of his own. Had he truly realized that his actions would eventually drive his friends away? The people that had become his family? It was a risk he hadn't accounted for, and he wasn't sure any reward would be worth it. A tickling on his rear pulled his attention from the window just in time for Dale to drop him into the bushes. They spun to find ghostly tentacles reaching for them, and they both backed away quickly. "Oi, don't think I don't know what you've done with those tentacles. We're not here to be your puppets," Hammond warned, his fingers itching for one of his weapons. "Force of habit," the massive god murmured unapologetically before beckoning them closer. Snatching the men up in its tentacles, the world changed once more, and Hammond found himself standing in the rain in an empty cemetery. He looked around before turning to the spirit. "Who are we meant to see here?" The ghost pointed its tentacles in the direction of a recently dug grave, and Hammond swallowed hard, following its direction until he stood in front of it. The stones around him told their tales of loved ones lost, with markings such as beloved father, loving wife, brother, sister, grandparent. But the stone in front of him merely said Hammond, inventor. After a long while, a lone figure in black made her way closer under an umbrella. Poppy stood by his side for a long moment in silence before releasing a sigh. "Oh, Hammond, it's been too long. The gang is all away and couldn't make it, but we couldn't let you go without one last goodbye, even if you left us long ago. So goodbye, old friend. I hope you found whatever it is you spent your life searching for." Poppy disappeared into the rain, and two grave diggers appeared to finish their work, chattering as they worked. "An inventor? You'd figure a chap like that would have more people showing up at his funeral." "Nah," the other argued. "What I hear, he invented things all right, but had to steal magic to make 'em work. Got his 5 minutes of fame, and then became an outcast because of his methods. If you gotta exploit others to be successful, what's your success really worth?" The second gravedigger nodded in agreement, and Hammond turned to find his escape. He'd heard enough. He was in such a hurry that he barely noticed bumping into a man on his way out of the cemetery until that man caught his arm. He looked around before opening the sides of his long coat. "Hey man, you looking for some magic? I got brownies, pixies, fairies, leprechauns. You name it, what's your poison?" Hammond's eyes widened in horror as he took in the various vials of creatures, most barely alive, in the containers keeping them enclosed. And the containers keeping them enclosed looked suspiciously like his own work. "No," Hammond shook his head, refusing to believe that his work could be used in such a way. He turned to run, only to come face to tentacle with Linda once more. "Get me out of here," he complained. "I've seen enough." Dale nodded in agreement. "I've seen enough as well. I must profess my love to Zara and make her mine before it's too late." The world spun once more and faded to black. Hammond opened his eyes to find Dale nudging him with his nose. He was back on the floor in his workshop, and Dale was back in his usual pig form. Sitting up quickly, he checked the calendar and sighed with relief. "We're not too late, Dale. It's Christmas Day." Hammond dashed to his machine and pulled the power source from his prototype, plucking the still shaking brownie from his cage. "I'm taking you home," he announced to the creature. "But first, we're getting a feast for your family and a pie for Mary." Hammond grabbed his coat and threw open the door, rushing to the market with the brownie tucked in his breast pocket. Getting more than he could possibly need, they took the tiny feast to the hollowed tree, and he set the brownie free. Dale nudged the brownie towards his tree, and Hammond pushed the food inside. "No more brownie-powered inventions," he promised, as the creature's family came out to collect him. He nodded at the child, and then made his way home, bursting through the door as Mary set the table. "Merry Christmas," he announced. Mary's face lit up, and she rushed forward to hug him. You made it. I was worried you'd be too busy in your workshop again. Never. This is far more important. Mary smiled and dragged him over to the table, taking the pies from him. Dale made his way to Zara's side with a box of chocolates clutched in his mouth. She chuckled and took them from him, setting them on the table, as he snorted and grunted rather animatedly. Well, you're rather talkative today, she laughed. And where did you get chocolates from? You probably just want me to share with you, huh? She pulled a chocolate from the box and handed it over, letting Dale take it from her fingers. Throughout the dinner, as they caught up and laughed, Dale remained at Zara's side, and she continued to feed him under the table until he fell asleep at her feet. Hammond looked around the room at his smiling friends and the table full of food and realized that he had everything his mother had wanted for him right there in front of him. He'd just been too busy to see it.
That was a perfectly heartwarming adaptation of the tale. I think you did great. It was a fantastic adaptation. I don't think Disney could have done it better. I don't.
It wasn't very funny.
There were several funny parts.
I mean,
if anything, though, I think you did a great job adapting. I think you did a great job. Like, all the ghosts gave a good lesson and everything, you know, and
I think that's where
the hard part.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
where I got lost, is because like I went through and like figured out the moral of the story,
Yeah.
and then I'm writing it. I'm like, crap, this isn't funny.
No, I think a lot of people couldn't have done that. I think you did great. I mean, I certainly couldn't have delivered a moral of the story. I was being a chucklehead,
Right.
you know. So, and you pulled off, and of course, right 3 times what I wrote. So
I didn't intend to. It just happened, and I was like, "There's no way." I like, and truth be told, like I pulled up the original like novella.
Yeah.
Of
So
A
did I. I
Christmas
pulled up
Carol,
the original.
and I'm like
now.
going through it, and I'm like, "There's no way I can cram this into like 2 or 3 pages," you know. So
Well,
it
you
just
did fantastic.
ended up
I thought
what
it was great. It was very heartwarming and.
Thank
Like,
you.
I hope you did learn that lesson. You know?
Right.
So. All right, guys. Well, Merry Christmas, and I hope you enjoy your holiday season, or whatever your holiday
Whatever
is.
your holiday is, have a
So,
fantastic holiday.
Yeah,
season.
have a great one. Enjoy your family. Thanks for spending some of it with us.